Thanks everybody for joining today. We really appreciate it. Certainly the CY24 OPPS Final Rule has lots of information that is very critical and important to all of us as hospital financial stakeholders. And so we want to be able to kind of go through each of these new requirements with you so that you can feel like you're better prepared in addressing them. So when we think about this CY24 OPPS Final Rule, all of this builds on previous requirements. And so some kind of a little bit of a history lesson here is important for us to kind of reference as we get started on this. Truly, all of this goes back to ACA, and that's where the origination for price transparency for hospitals really got its start. In that original call to action, hospitals were simply recommended to put forth price transparency information. But for years, really, hospitals sort of struggled with understanding what that meant, how to do it. So in the FY19 IPPS Final Rule, this was really CMS's first attempt at saying, hey, this ACA language, we meant it. You've got to make this information public. And there was a very basic call to action there that hospitals make available a list of their current standard charges via the internet in a machine readable format and to update it at least annually. And that one sentence is what now has sort of expanded into a number of different areas and requirements. So when we think about standard charges now, right, like the standard charge definition has been really expanded. When we think about machine readable format, that now definition has been expanded as well, and how to post and what those requirements are. So from that one sentence we got in that FY19 IPPS Final Rule, we built on that. So in CY20, that OPPS Final Rule there introduced clarifications. What was a hospital? There was some confusion around who had to comply. And now we know essentially every hospital in the United States has to comply with these hospital price transparency requirements, very few exceptions. There was definitions for 5 types of standard charge, those being gross charge, discounted cash price, payer-specific negotiated charge, and the de-identified minimum and maximum of that negotiated charge. And obviously, that payer-specific negotiated charge, that was the lightning rod for our industry in terms of how do we provide these payer-specific charges. And we'll be talking more about that today, as that's a significant component in the CY24 OPPS Final Rule. There was for definitions for items and services, and that included employed professional fees. To date, employed professional fees still goes without a formal definition, and that's a very noteworthy thing to make here. We still get a lot of questions from clients as to how do we do this? CMS has provided some reference points, but they also have said we're intentionally right now not going to formally define what employment is, recognizing that employment and these relationships can be very complex for each facility and each system. There were requirements for disclosing the data in 2 formats: the machine readable format and a consumer-friendly display. Much of what is included in the CY24 OPPS Final Rule all relates to that single machine readable file. But it does not mean that the consumer-friendly display is not still important and is not still being evaluated. Again, just a lot of the new requirements all center around the machine readable file. And then there are also non-compliance monitoring actions and penalties in an appeals process that were set forward. And there are also components here that will build off of that as well. CY22 OPPS Final Rule, really there, the primary thing was a significant increase in the monetary penalties for non-compliance. And there was some language there too around prohibiting the use of barriers for people to go out and actually download that machine readable file on the hospital's website. So with that, all of this context in place, the CY24 OPPS rule really kind of builds on all of those things in 5 primary update categories. One is defining new terms. The second is a good faith effort and a machine readable file attestation. The third in here, and this is where we're going to spend a lot of our time, is the standardization of the machine readable format and additional data elements that have been introduced as part of that new template. There's also some provisions in there around improving access to the MRF, and then, again, as mentioned, enhancing enforcement activities is a component in here as well. Now, as we go through each of these 5 categories, I'm going to summarize this information, but I'm also going to pull out the language from the final rule just so that you've got a sense of this isn't just sort of Jamie's word or my interpretation. I'm really trying to kind of pull out, this is the language from the machine readable or from the OPPS final rule, so that you can have a comfort level as to those provisions that are in place and the new requirements. Let's first talk about some definitions that CMS is going to formally define through the final rule. There can be a question as to kind of why are we talking about this, or why do we need to do this? Well, with the types of changes that they are making, and primarily in this standardization of the machine readable file, CMS now needs to formally define within federal rulemaking some of these terms, so as they reference them going forward, again, they've been codified in the federal language. And so the 4 terms that they are codifying here is a CMS template. That's going to mean a CSV format or a JSON schema that CMS makes available for the purposes of compliance with the hospital price transparency requirements. So again, the thought process here is, right, that going forward, that template can change, but the template itself or the reference for that template is codified now in rulemaking. There will be versions of that, of course, that will change over time, but the use of the template now is part of the federal requirements. An estimated allowed amount, and this is a very significant piece that we'll spend some time talking about. In the original language, this was previously called the consumer-friendly expected allowed amount. It means the average dollar amount that the hospital has historically received from a third-party payer for an item or service. Now, note that in the proposed rule, that consumer-friendly expected allowed amount actually referred to the expected payment. And in the final rulemaking, they have switched this to historical payment. And we're going to talk about the conditions for which this field needs to be derived and included on the machine readable file. But again, one key note to make here, this is a significant change, is A, the introduction of this field, but B, the change from expected payment or a prospective view of this to a historical reimbursement for this particular data field. Encode means essentially converting that hospital standard charge information into the machine readable format that complies with the HPT guidelines. And so again, this is just a way to say, you got to get this information into the template. The way that you do that is encode it into that template. And then finally, machine readable file. They're just formally defining this as a single digital file that is machine readable, is in a machine readable format. So the first section here of kind of, your checklist in terms of things to be watching out for, aware of, is the good faith effort and machine readable file attestation. So CMS essentially from the outset, as they've been looking at these machine readable files, and in conjunction with some consumer advocacy groups, have looked at the contents of these files and have questioned the completeness or the accuracy of the data contained in the file. And so this provision in the new requirements is essentially there to address those concerns that hospitals do put forward a good faith effort at completing these files in an accurate manner, and then eventually attesting to that in the machine readable format. the question may be, why do we have two components here? And really the reason is, in the original proposal, the template, which we'll talk about here in a second, that was due to be required as of January 1st of 2024 with a 60-day grace period. They've now delayed that machine-readable file template for July 1st, 2024. So probably the idea here is the machine-readable file attestation will occur with that template on July 1st, but they don't want to give the implication that, excuse me, a hospital would not have to have a good faith effort at doing this as of January 1st. So for January 1st, really all that you have to do is hopefully all that you've been doing so far, and that is putting forward a good faith effort at completing your machine readable file in a true, accurate, and a complete manner. We have had some clients reach out about, should we have a website statement, or what should this look like? Should we do anything more beyond sort of a recognition that we're doing it? There is no language in the proposed rule that would say you have to have a website statement, or that would be beneficial. However, CMS oftentimes in all of their HPT kind of requirements or communication has said, certainly going above and beyond is always appreciated. So if having a statement on your website that basically would say, potentially even the language over here that will be required in the machine readable file for that attestation. So to the best of its knowledge and ability, the hospital has included all applicable standard charge information in its machine readable file in accordance with the requirements of, and again, that's the HPT reference, that the information is encoded as true, accurate, and complete. That statement might be a very good statement to actually just list on your website, maybe before the link to get to that machine readable file. But again, it's not a requirement. It really is just an acknowledgement that you guys are doing this there on January 1st. Beginning July 1st, however, that statement, that affirmation statement will be in the template. And then in a yes/no field, each hospital will indicate whether it agrees with the statement or does not. Obviously, if you're going to put out a file, you're going to want to click yes. You should be putting it together in a way that would be consistent with the affirmation statement. So one of the very significant pieces that we mentioned is the now requirement to have the data in a templated format that will be in two different structures, either a CSV or a JSON format. All of this goes back to, in the CY24 OPPS Final Rule, in the proposed rule, rather, there was a request for comment on standardizing the file structure. So, our firm, I know many others, submitted kind of feedback on that. As a result, CMS established a technical expert panel that then reviewed those proposals. They also reached out to industry stakeholders. We were honored to be a part of that kind of discussion process. From all of that technical expert panel review, they put forward a voluntary sample format last November that indicated a methodology for a way a hospital could encode their data to be more structured going forward. And so again, last year that was put forward in November and was voluntary. Hospitals were not required to conform to that standard. However, we all kind of thought that at some point that voluntary format was going to be required. And so that's what's happened through the proposed and then final rule for CY24. This will be required beginning July 1st. So kind of, maybe take a second and think about your own posting nature at your hospital. If you have a file right now that you posted on July 1st of this past year, 2023, you're fine going forward until July 1st, 2024. And at which case, you'll just want to make sure that your new machine readable file conforms to one of these new standards that we'll talk about here in a second. If you posted on or plan to post on January 1st, you are fine to keep in the format that you are in today. You do not need to conform to the new standards. And it's why CMS has provided additional time. There's a lot that's here, and a lot still that CMS is still planning to release some technical guidance on through examples that have not been released yet. So they've delayed that implementation until July 1st. So recognize your file right now or for January 1st, 2024 will be fine. You'll just want to make sure that as of July 1st, you do an update again, though. Even if the content of the file is the same, your charge master prices haven't changed, or your payment with your negotiated payers haven't changed, you'll need to conform or encode that same data into this new format to meet those new requirements. There are two fundamental structures that the technical expert panel put forward. One is a CSV and the other is a JSON format. The JSON schema essentially is an object-based database structure. It's not kind of, I'm sort of old school. I think of kind of the Excel structure. It's not that way. It really is a much more machine readable file kind of content. In fact, if you've tried to open up one, a lot of times folks will look and go, gosh, this is so messy. It looks like there's just a huge sort of, influx of information that sort of is very text-based. All of that's okay. It's a way that actually a machine can actually digest and consume that information. And so that format is one of the ones that they selected because it lends itself very easily to developers to try to kind of take that information. Another one is the CSV format. And this might be a little bit easier for some to kind of work with and can actually export out to or be opened with Excel. So some clients feel very kind of passionate about a consumer, even though this information is not supposed to be sort of consumed by the consumer. They still feel very strongly that the information should be presentable in a way that can be evaluated by a patient. And so that CSV format would provide it to be opened in Excel for that purpose. Within the CSV structure, there is both a tall and a wide format. The tall format is going to be static headers across, again, think of it almost kind of like as an Excel sort of structure, static column headers where all of our payer information will go in additional rows. And in the CSV wide format, there will be variable column headers, and those payers are going to be in separate columns. So each negotiated payer and plan would be in its own specific column. So those are the two formats that will be presented in. Previously, other digital formats such as XML were permitted, but again, now there are only two formats, CSV and JSON, by which CMS will require the information to be encoded and where they will have templates built for hospitals to comply. All right, all of those data elements then that are a part of the template, and there are a number of new ones. So, we're going to talk through the ones that are new or that have been added. So all of our gross charge types, those are still there. Our definitions of items and services, those are still there. However, CMS in this new template is providing additional fields that we now need to comply with. Most all of these will be July 1st, 2024, but there are a few that will be coming kind of online on January 1st, 2025. So they're giving 6 more months for some of these data elements to still be worked through. One kind of fundamental question might be, as you're just trying to think through again how your file is structured, If you're a July 1st or somewhere around there, kind of posting date, you may want to consider having those elements that would be required for January 1st, 2025, also in your file, so that you don't have to then update again 6 months later. And again, if you're a January 1st, kind of posting date or somewhere around in there, you'll probably, again, want to just update to the new format, but then you still would have time additionally to get those new fields that will be, on January 1st into those as well. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're thinking through your own kind of compliance planning. Let's take a look at these new fields, and we're going to kind of pinpoint some points of interest for some of these. So there are different categories of data elements that have been added. The first is just general data elements that have been added into the template. Of those, CMS is asking for the hospital name or names that are associated with the license number for the reporting entity. They're also asking for the location name or names and addresses for those. They are also asking for the CMS template version and the date of most recent update. If version 2.0 is the one that is still being used or referenced come July 1st, the machine readable file version number would be 2.0. Little call out here for location and address, and this is important. So CMS did hear the feedback in the proposed rule where folks said, gosh, if we are going to be required to list out all of our locations and all of our addresses, when we especially think about kind of medical office buildings, sort of outpatient ambulatory care sites, this could get really, really huge and sometimes changes fairly frequently. And so, there could be some confusion, or some burden even with having to display that. So they have clarified that the locations and addresses only need to relate to those with hospital inpatient locations and standalone emergency departments. However, just because those are the only ones that have to be sort of specifically identified, they still, right, we still have to put all of the outpatient information for the additional ambulatory sites in our files. So again, just sort of an important call out there. Standard charge types. This is where there is a lot of important things to key in on here to kind of walk through. Some very significant ones that we'll discuss. The first is payer and plan. CMS has created now separate data elements for payer and plan. However, they have heard feedback that sometimes, right, our payer has only one set of negotiated rates that may apply to all plans, or they have one set of PPO rates that apply to all their PPO plans. And so what they are allowing here is you will not have to display for every payer and plan combination, only every payer and plan combination where there are different sets of negotiated rates. So if all of your PPO plans are going to apply to every PPO plan that payer would have, you would simply put in that field all PPO, or again, all plans if it's going to relate to all plans. Standard charge method. This is absolutely a new field and one that we'll all want to pay special attention to. CMS has wanted to understand the values by which those payer negotiated rates are established. So they've added this new field, standard charge method, to help answer that question. Now, there are only a handful of valid values for this data element, and those are case rate, fee schedule, percent of billed charges, per diem, and other. Now, some of you are probably hearing this and going, well, I don't know that my payer negotiated rates ever fall completely nice and neat into one of these primarily 4 areas, which is why CMS has created the other category. And in just a second, we'll talk about an extension of this, of where they want to know the type of value that you're representing in the file and whether that value is based off of an algorithm. So our viewpoint is, because hospital payment by and large is not nice and neat and conforming to just one of these categories, even for a particular claim, right? A particular claim will have extensions of all of this, carve-outs that can be paid on a percent of billed charges, but are established on a DRG base rate. There can be lesser of language, outlier provisions, hierarchy language, right? That will come into play in terms of how that claim or that service will be paid. And so our thought is, as we think about how hospitals will comply with this, we believe that we probably will see a lot of hospitals list other for most, if not all, of their standard charge method values. Because again, we just don't know that we see examples where any of them would fall nice and neat into one of those 4 examples. Standard charge value interpretation. So sort of an extension of that, CMS is recognized, and we were happy to see this recognition in both the proposed and final rules, that payer-specific negotiated charges can't always be expressed in a dollar value, and it's not the same across all patients because it's going to be dependent on that patient's service utilization. And so with that, CMS is requiring that hospitals indicate through new data elements whether the payer-specific negotiated charge is going to be interpreted as a dollar amount, or if it's based on a percentage or algorithm. So thinking about what we just talked about, if our payment doesn't fit nice and neat into one of those 4 categories, we're probably going to list other, but then we need to describe the algorithm that is used in the development of that amount or that payer-specific negotiated charge. That in and of itself was a piece in the proposed rule that gave many of us some pause for concern. And the reason for that is, right, describing all of the different data points that go into a hospital's payment algorithm is almost infinite. So thinking about how a patient would come in and how that patient's service utilization and associated charges and conditions will create that unique charge, describing that algorithm would be very challenging to do, certainly in a single cell, if not, again, many hundreds or thousands of cells. We were pleased. CMS responded to that feedback, and they agreed that detailing an algorithm would be what they summarized, very rightly so, unwieldy and burdensome. So CMS is going to allow the hospital to describe, and they said not specify, what the algorithm is. They quote, and that bottom thing that you'll see there is a quote directly from the final rule. Descriptions for algorithms can include, for example, a link to the algorithm, which that could be challenging, a description of a commonly understood algorithm. Again, there's not a lot in terms of commonality for many of these algorithms, or a list of factors that would be used to determine the individualized or variable allowed amounts in dollars. we probably see this latter being the place that most hospitals will go in terms of describing the general conditions that exist to create the algorithm. That is sort of our approach in this in terms of how we think we're going to need to comply with that particular component, a description of the conditions that would influence or create that algorithm. And kind of building off of that, if you're going to list algorithm as your payment methodology, then you need to have this estimated allowed amount. And this was the consumer-friendly expected allowed amount and is now just estimated allowed amount. And again, that relates to the average dollar amount that the hospital has historically received from a third-party payer for an item or service. Now, we think there are several points that are super important to bring out from this. Again, the first is the proposed rule indicated that this value needed to be based on a prospective understanding of payment. But the final rule edits this to be historical payment, presumably based on what we read for the comments and responses, to make this easier for a hospital to obtain. Corresponding to that, and this is also really important, CMS has gone on record to say they are preserving the flexibility for hospitals to derive this value, but they do specifically share that, and I have the quote listed in there, that using the 835 remits would appear to meet this requirement, as the 835 form is used by hospitals to track and analyze their claims and reimbursement patterns. What we believe is a huge win for the industry on this is a recognition that claims data is critical for payment. Again, it goes back to that point that we were making. Each patient that comes into our facility typically is going to have a unique payment amount based on their unique service utilization. So recognizing this is based off of that service utilization and their unique contracted rates and terms that exist with the payer, super important in terms of establishing the average payer-specific negotiated charge that would relate to, or that expected allowed amount that would relate to the algorithm established. One thing to note here, though, and this is sort of potentially a point of confusion, maybe for many of us, the date for implementation for this estimated allowed amount is January 1st, 2025. However, the dates for the charge method and the charge interpretation, meaning an algorithm, those are July 1st, 2024. So it's unclear to us how a hospital would satisfy the requirement of listing out that their payment is based off of an algorithm, in which case CMS requires the use of the estimated allowed amount, if the estimated allowed amount is only required then on January 1st, 2025. So again, our thought would be prepared for July 1st, 2024 to include the estimated allowed amount if you plan to include algorithm, which again, we believe many hospitals will elect to use that as their charge method. Next up, drug unit of measurement and drug type of measurement. This goes along in the section of items and services. And there's a couple in this that really are more straightforward. A description is there. That's just your item description. There's nothing really groundbreaking there. Setting is also, not super difficult. It's whether the item or service relates to kind of an inpatient, outpatient, or both. And so again, for many of our items and services, the charge type probably will relate to both, but there certainly are examples where it could be used in just one or the other setting. So that's specified there. The last one, though, that we mentioned, the drug unit of measurement and drug type of measurement, these have been delayed until January 1st, 2025. We provided feedback that these would be very difficult data elements for a hospital to support in including on their machine readable file. And so we advocated for a delay. We were pleased to see that it got delayed out until January 1st of 2025. But we still think there is probably much to be done in the months ahead for a hospital to be able to satisfy the requirement here. There also is some guidance that we think will still be needed from CMS on this. And they have shared that they will be providing additional examples. Right now, they only have one, and I've listed that one here. They give an example of an aspirin, 81 milligrams chewable tablet, where they would list the unit of measurement as 1 and the type of measurement as UN for unit. As we know, there are a number of different types of units, and we believe that is going to cause many hospitals difficulty in getting this file established. Oftentimes, this information lives in other systems, and in some cases, we found from certain clients where this information just is actually not separately stored or electronically stored. And so, again, I fear that this will be a very large undertaking for many hospitals. And we're hopeful that CMS will provide some additional examples because, again, even in this current example, some of our clients might be storing milligram in the unit of measurement, not unit. And so I am concerned that the interpretation of this might lead to some confusion in implementation. And again, then not line up correspondingly with a database that has been established. And when we think about the thousands and thousands of individual drug codes, that creates quite an undertaking for many hospitals. So hopefully more to come from CMS, and certainly we'll be keeping you updated as we learn of this. And we also are trying to get some additional feedback here as well. So what do we do about null data? Some of you may recall in a MLN call a couple years ago, CMS suggested that actually including an NA could assist in communicating the hospital did not intentionally leave a field blank. And so, they were getting questions from consumer advocacy groups about, again, the completeness of the data. What are these null values? What do they represent? And so the NA was sort of a suggestion to make a case that it was not, left out, by accident, but that it was purposefully a null value. However, with the file attestation, that is no longer needed, and CMS now recommends that the hospital not include a value or any type of indicator, such as NA, if the hospital does not have applicable data to encode. If there's some clarifying note, that could go into the additional generic notes or additional payer-specific notes fields if there's something more to provide there. There is one exception to this, though, and that is on that estimated allowed amount, CMS recommends a value of 9 nines when a hospital does not have sufficient claims history to derive a value. Now, there is a path on the what's sufficient claims history. CMS references their cell suppression policy, You know, for those of you that have familiarity there, it's sort of that what we call the less than 11 rule. Just keep note that for many of these payers and plans, if you elected, and CMS did not say that you should use their cell suppression methodology, only that could be a reference point for you. If you did use a volume of less than 11 for a certain payer plan combination for a certain service or service package, it could be very likely that very little data at all would be shown for payer negotiated charges. And while on one hand, a hospital might go, gosh, maybe there are positives to that. On the other, right, the thing that we open the door for is additional, probably challenge or scrutiny coming from the public and potentially even CMS from saying, wait, there really is not a lot of data here. We personally do not see, because volume numbers itself are not included in the file, there's not a way for anybody in the public to determine if there is a value that was built off of one claim, two claims, or 100 claims. So that the HIPAA kind of concerns there are not present that they would be, again, if you had PHI, which there's none of that in the machine readable file, or if the data actually corresponded with a volume count that you could identify a patient back to that. And again, volume data is not there. So just kind of beware that technical guidance is on the GitHub, but we wanted to pull that point out because if you elected to use a suppression policy for a claims history that is sort of less than 11, you could be opening yourself up potentially to not displaying much data and then correspondingly having some pushback from the public. Okay, a couple other, those are all of the data elements and obviously many in there, but that wraps up kind of those data elements that would be additional data elements included in the new template. There are two important updates for January 1st that don't really relate to the contents of your machine readable file, but do relate to access to that machine readable file. The first is CMS is requiring that a hospital create a text file and place it in their root folder on its public website that will include a standardized set of fields for the hospital location name that corresponds to that machine readable file, the source page URL that hosts the machine readable file, a direct link to the machine readable file. That's the kind of the URL that goes directly to kind of grab that file, and then a hospital point of contact. So the idea there is if CMS needs to get a hold of somebody, needs to be able to find that information quickly, they can now grab that. Again, others will be able to do that as well through this text file. Additionally, CMS is requiring that hospitals create a website footer link that will go to the page that hosts the machine readable file. That link in the footer should be price transparency. Previously, it was hospital price transparency. It's now shortened to just price transparency. So that link in your footer should take a patient or anybody to your price transparency page where your machine readable file is hosted. These, again, both of these things are required here in just about a month, January 1st of 2024. Last kind of area here is CMS's strengthening of their enforcement capabilities. One of the themes that they brought up in the proposed and final rules is a lot of the authority that they have, rather, is both monitoring and assessing. However, the actions at their disposal are really more monitoring monitoring actions as opposed to assessment actions. So they are writing in and strengthening their ability to assess the, again, accuracy and completeness of the data within the machine readable file, not just monitor for compliance. Within those assessment activities, there are several key things to note. One is CMS is giving itself the authority to conduct a comprehensive compliance review. A little bit more on that in just a second. They are requiring hospitals upon request to have an authorized official certified the accuracy and completeness of the MRF data. So while the attestation in the file itself is organization-wide, it's not tied to a specific individual. In this assessment activity, they are asking for a person, an authorized official, to be identified and to then certify the accuracy and completeness of that data. So it's sort of identifying one person to be on record. They are then also requiring hospitals, upon request, to submit additional documentation to determine compliance. That would be a part of its comprehensive compliance review. And within that, an example of a document that they could request would be your payer contracts. Again, our firm, many others, expressed concern about CMS, any government agency potentially having the ability to require a hospital to turn over, upon request, a privately negotiated contract. CMS's response is there has already been legal action to require hospitals to disclose their data through this machine readable file. In the court case a couple years ago, that public nature of those documents was upheld. And so, again, this is in there as an element that CMS does have the ability to do. It will be interesting to see how often they elect to do it. I will say I think CMS so far has been pretty good and collaborative with hospitals at trying to work towards compliance and resolving issues where they think there could be a question. I think this is sort of allowing them to have, access if there is a problem within a conversation that's occurring. But again, we'll obviously, that will be something that all of us, I know, will be looking at. Acknowledging warning notices is the next category. CMS will require hospitals to submit an acknowledgement of receipt of any of the warning notices. This actually is a good piece in here. One of the things that can happen, and we've seen it happen, where a hospital may have gotten a warning notice, but because of again, classic kind of mailroom sort of things, it doesn't end up kind of getting to the person that needed to. And so CMS assumes that the hospital knows, but doesn't necessarily know. Now there's sort of a piece in place to make sure that the communication line is established. Addressing system non-compliance. This again, we also think is a positive. If CMS is reviewing one hospital that's a part of a system, their file, and they see a potential for an issue in the contents, they can elect to sort of say, probably if it exists in one of these, it probably exists in all of those for the health system. So let's try to kind of work through the issue. And then if we find that it is an issue and it needs to be address it in your other ones. And then we all know that we've covered all of these, all of the hospitals within the system. So again, I think it makes sense for everybody to kind of have this piece in place. The last is publicizing actions and outcomes. CMS previously had the ability to kind of post publicly, but it was really more geared towards when fines were established. This now they are allowing their authority to post any time there's an assessment of a hospital's compliance, any compliance action taken against the hospital, the status of that compliance action, or the outcome of that. And then finally, any notifications sent to health system leadership. So again, how they will choose to display this, we don't know. We do think actually some of this comes from consumer advocacy groups saying, hey, we told you should check out this one hospital. Have you done it? This gives CMS the ability to say, yes, we've received your request. This hospital is under, we are reviewing their file. And so, sometimes the interpretation from an industry perspective, you can kind of wonder what's behind that. I think actually this can be a positive if these advocacy groups know that that CMS is actually looking into information when that's come about. So to wrap up, there are just sort of a few things that we wanted to kind of pinpoint as kind of your checklist. One is for January 1st, having that text file posted in the website footer, having your transparency link on your hospital webpage, your good faith effort. Again, hopefully nothing there more that you need to do, and then just prep for kind of added assessment activities. Come July 1st, we'll want to make sure that we're leveraging that CMS template in either the JSON or the CSV format, including all required data fields that are a part of that template, and then including the attestation in the machine readable file. And then come January 1st, 2025, the estimated allowed amount, again, we had the caveat there for that, of course, modifier, drug unit of measurement, and drug type of measurement are also pieces that will be required then as well. Within this, and you'll have this as a reference, we've got templates that we'll be providing, some of the valid values that are existing for some of these cells of interest. But again, we certainly appreciate your time today. And I know we've got a few minutes here. And so we'll try and address some questions that we can. Those that we can't, we will also try to follow up with individually. But again, thank you so much for spending time with us. Certainly, too, if you've got questions or concerns, we're happy to follow up with you individually if we can be of further assistance that way. Let me look and see what we've got.
Yeah, just a quick thanks, Jamie, for doing this. I know we're running close on time here, yep. But if you do have questions, if you could submit them in the Q&A box so that we could answer them for everyone. We just have too many people on the webinar today to open up the phone lines for those type of questions. But if you could post them in the Q&A, or if you're having trouble with that, you can send us an email and we'll respond that way. But Jamie, hopefully you can see some of the questions there and maybe answer a few of these before we wrap up today.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see what we can get through. First, yes, and note, these slides will be available on the website in addition to some of the other documents that we have for kind of compliance with the rules. So absolutely, those will be available. Good question on, does CMS have a specific requirement for how many clicks from the footer to get to the machine readable file itself? So the idea here on the link from the website to the machine readable file is wherever that file is hosted, your link should go to that page. If at that point, that opens up a second page, again, to download it, I think that's acceptable. What CMS is basically indicating is sometimes in the global kind of website architecture, it's been very difficult to just even find where the price transparency site is. So linking that to the web page where it's hosted is the official language for that CMS has provided. Great question. Will this apply to critical access hospitals? Yes, it does. There have not been any additional definitions of employed physician for the inclusion of that pro fee. Great question there. It is, again, the last rule that came out, CMS said they were intentionally not defining employed physician, which again is probably one of the reasons why when we look at the data, only about 4 to 5% of hospitals have included any kind of pro fee data in their machine readable files. Let's look at some others. Question on the template or the text file. On the GitHub, the technical GitHub, the text file for January 1st, there has been a request for a sample. CMS has not released a sample for that yet. You know, it could be good to work with your web team on just establishing just those standard data elements that are in there for that. But there is not a template yet that has been released. I know we're at time. So maybe what we'll do is there's a couple in here that are great questions, pretty technical, that would be great to follow up on. So we'll try to provide some additional answers to these as well. And again, welcome any questions that you have even after the presentation today that we can help you out with. So again, thank you so much, everybody, for making time for us today. And we'll certainly look forward to continued conversation in the days, weeks, and months ahead. So have a great day.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. And just to kind of reiterate, we did record today's session. We'll be posting that on our website along with copies of today's slides, any additional answers to questions that we might not have gotten through, plus those kind of reference documents that Jamie showed here in the presentation. All of those will be made available. We'll be sending out emails over the next few days once we get everything posted. Obviously, if you have any specific questions or follow-up, reach out to us directly, your account executive, any of us, or just info@Cleverley Associates, and we'll be happy to get back with you. But again, thanks for taking time out of your day today. Thanks, Jamie, for presenting, and we hope you all have a great Thursday. Bye, everyone.